Have you ever committed a crime? Think about it. Have you ever murdered someone? Robbed a bank? Driven a few miles above the speed limit? Have you ever ran a stop sign? Or have you ever even jaywalked? Those are all technically crimes. And here's another one for this checklist of crimes you might have committed. Have you ever digitally pirated something? Have you ever maybe watched a movie on a sketchy website, or maybe seen one of those leaks for a new upcoming movie like Spider-Man Far From Home on YouTube? Or have you listened to music on one of those other weird sites that's free when you should have had to pay for it? If you've done that, you've probably engaged in what's called digital piracy. Digital piracy is, of course, the act of pirating something that's a digital information good. But once again, lots of people do it, so is it by necessity wrong? That's what I plan on telling you today, exactly why digital piracy is wrong, using a few different philosophical means, and also using economical means. So, without further ado, let's begin. Digital piracy is exactly how it sounds. It's piracy that's performed over the digital area, the internet. So take, for instance, Spider-Man Far From Home, which is of course that new Spider-Man movie that came out in theaters. So digital piracy in this example takes place in three parts: the stealing, the redistribution, and the consumption of said good. So the stealing, of course, would be someone going into the theater and, of course, taking videos of said film before it came out on DVD. The redistribution would be them uploading those videos on YouTube, and the consumption would be on whoever was viewing that video. And all three sources, of course, a consumer is okay with that because they want to see the new trend. They want to see what's happening in Spider-Man. They're excited for that movie. But for the producers and the people who make the film, they don't like it very much, of course, because that means ticket sales aren't going to be as high, or even that information is getting out beforehand. Sometimes storytellers don't like leaks. However, it doesn't just take place with movies in theaters. It takes place with movies on weird websites that you don't want to have to pay to watch, or it takes place with music, or even things like textbooks or other sources like that. Digital piracy is vast and it's hard to stop because it's on the internet. The internet is so big, it's almost impossible for them to stop. It stops, however, at the consumer. Digital piracy is, like anything else, a market. And when the market dwindles, so then does the quality produced dwindling. So to talk about digital piracy and to talk about how it's wrong or how it needs to be prevented, you have to start it at the consumer. And that's exactly what we're planning to set out here to do today. And I'll be discussing that through three main methods.
There's a lot of ways to view morality, and one of those ways was brought about by a really influential philosopher known as Immanuel Kant. If you know anything about philosophy, you've probably heard the name Immanuel Kant. He's very important to the larger scheme of things. But the only thing we're going to be talking about today was his system of moral philosophy. And he thought that all moral philosophies or all moral rules could be broken down into one of two claims. And if they didn't pass both of these ideas, it would be wrong to do so. Those two claims were universally lumped together in what was called the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative, of course, comes in two parts. The first part is that under no circumstance are you to treat humans as a mean to an end. Humans in themselves are the ultimate end. And the second idea is called the universalization test, which is the idea that if every single human were to do this action, if it is irrational or unrealistic to assume that every single human doing it would bring about a good result, then it would also be immoral. So of course, viewing digital piracy through these two lenses, it's clear to see it doesn't pass either. See, firstly, it treats the entertainment or the idea of what the human wants as the end in itself. And it does that at the cost of the producers and the people who make the film itself. They're not getting their consent or their legal rights represented when someone is to take their work without asking. And if you look at universalization, it doesn't pass that either. From Kant's perspective, you couldn't do lying because every single person lying means you couldn't trust anything. There would be no reality or truth to look at. And the same thing is true here. If someone were to steal and digitally pirate every single movie and every single book, no money would go anywhere. There wouldn't be any transitions of funds, everything would be weird and all on YouTube, and you can't imagine a world in which movies only have one person buying a ticket, filming it, and uploading it to a free place like YouTube. Then the producers wouldn't be incentivized to do anything, and once again, it would fall into logical inconsistencies. So from the deontological perspective, it's impossible to see digital piracy as a good thing. But even if you don't choose to believe random philosophies of people like Immanuel Kant, there's other philosophies and other reasons not to commit digital piracy.
See, you don't even need to believe in Immanuel Kant or his categorical imperative or anything of the sort to still make the claim that philosophy proves that digital piracy is wrong. For instance, there's a philosophy known as utilitarianism, which you could use to get the exact same effect. Utilitarianism is, of course, the idea that you should maximize the most amount of good for the most amount of people. And when you think about digital piracy, it's clear that it doesn't do that. See, digital piracy at its core is serving the individual. When I pirate a movie, or if I were to pirate a movie online, that's so I don't have to pay for the inconvenience of the gas going to the theaters to see it, the gas going to the store to get the movie, or the subscription I need to see it, as well as the payment, of course, it costs to get that ticket. So, of course, to me, it's of great benefit. But when you think about it, those tickets, right, those go into paying individuals, right? All, of course, the people who have to make the special effects, who edit it, who are responsible for filming, even the caterers who pay for the actors themselves, or the actors also, or the producers and the directors. And of course, some of those people are less affected by that than others. But ultimately, when you're digitally pirating, you're damaging that entire market. You as an individual are having a large amount of consequence across a large amount of people. It's causing a lot of damage or a lot of minor damage to a lot of people, and that spreads out and that builds up, and that's worth a whole lot. For instance, if of course you were to digitally pirate, Spider-Man Far From Home, sure, it's making a lot of money and it's making billions of dollars at the box office, or it made billions of dollars at the box office, but even you in that single place are spreading your damage over a large amount of people. And so that in itself would be, as a utilitarian would say, morally wrong. But you don't even need that. For instance, if I was to put these books back on the shelf, I could show you once again another way as to why you could prove that digital piracy is not only illogical, but immoral. And to do that, we'll have to use statistics. But you don't even need to use complex philosophies to prove your point. You can use a lot simpler things. You can use statistics to show that ultimately digital piracy is damaging to society. And that's exactly what you're going to do if you'll just stay with me a bit longer. See, regardless of moralistic philosophies, it's pretty easily to show with statistics that digital piracy doesn't make any sense and it's irrational. See, a digital study that was conducted on digital piracy as a whole and accumulated all of this information went on to show that digital piracy causes annually a loss of 70,000 jobs, or also a loss of several $billion. And that's going to be sourced right in the bottom right corner there, and of course in the description if you're wondering. And it showed that, like I said, it's statistically damaging, and that when you look at digital piracy as a whole, it provides very little good to the general overall market. See, but the problem isn't just that it's damaging. It's the problem that it's not really stoppable. See, with us people running stop signs, right? It's naturally stopped by the fact that when you run stop signs, you run the risk of getting into car accidents. And if you do, there's police officers to give you speeding tickets. But there's no way to regulate the internet. Companies themselves are having a hard time finding ways to regulate it. And that's because the only way to stop digital piracy is to stop it at the source, the consumer, which would be you and me. See, ultimately, big corporations and various governments don't have the ability to stop digital piracy. I don't have the ability to stop digital piracy. Stopping digital piracy is only at the source. It's at the consumer. Ultimately, you might think that digital piracy is some way to stick it to the man, to take from the rich businessman who's charging all sorts of money to see tickets. But those jobs and those dollars, those aren't affecting those rich businessmen. They're affecting the hard workers. They're affecting the music producers for smaller indie companies. They're affecting the people who are responsible for lighting and catering of those places. So that when you're in the act and process of digital piracy, who you're harming ultimately is someone like you, who's working hard to make a living in this life and isn't going by on all of that money. The choice to stop digital piracy isn't mine to make, it isn't the government's to make, and it isn't those corporations to make, it's yours. And if anything, at least consider these statistics, consider this logic, consider the fact that it is harming those who are working hard for what they want, and they are trying to make a living. And ultimately, if you decide to stop it, great, good for you. And if you don't decide to stop it, I can't do anything about that. But that doesn't change the harm, the damage, or the immorality of what might be happening. So that decision is yours. Thank you for listening.